In the summer of 1816, an elephant walked through Maine, not in a truck, not in a circus train, on foot, through the mud and the frost of the coldest summer Maine had seen in living memory, walking through the night so nobody could get a free look. The elephant's name was Old Bet, and when she died, the news of her passing spread from town to town faster than she ever could. And in a farmhouse in Bridgeton, Maine, a woman named Chloe heard the news of this elephant, and she laughed out loud. And I'll tell you why in a moment, because Chloe's story is one of the reasons we're here. Before we meet Old Bet, we need to understand the world she walked into. On April 10th, 1815, a volcano called Mount Tambora on a small island in what is now Indonesia erupted in one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded human history. It tragically killed most of the island's inhabitants immediately, and it sent a cloud of ash and sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere that circled the globe and began blocking sunlight. Nobody in New England knew anything about that. They only knew what happened next. The summer of 1816 did not come. New England saw snow in June, frost in July, apple trees in bloom in late May froze solid. Crops were planted and replanted and failed again and again. Some called it 1800 and froze to death. Farmers who had done everything right watched everything die. In Alfred, Maine, a small York County town, a man named Daniel Davis and his brother had mortgaged their farms to build a sawmill. Then Davis's brother had died. Davis was now supporting his family and his brother's family as well. Two frost-bitten, failing farms, all the debt, and no harvest coming. And it was into this misery that Hachaliah Bailey walked in with an elephant. Now, Old Bet was one of the first elephants ever seen in America, possibly the very first. The ship that brought her from Bengal to New York in April of 1796 was called the America, and it was captained by Jacob Crowninshield of the family that I mentioned in the Edgar Allan Poe Telltale Heart video. I'll link that in the description. But Jacob Crowninshield was a Salem, Massachusetts man from a merchant family whose name still graces the Crowninshield house in Salem. And the officer who wrote the entry in the ship's log, noting that an elephant was on board, the man who put her existence on the American record, was a Salem sea captain named Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, if you've watched other videos on this channel, you may have run into the name Nathaniel Hawthorne before. This is the writer's father, Nathaniel Sr. He was still spelling his name without the W. That was added later on. But he was the officer that made the record showing when Old Bet came to America. Now, Hawthorne unfortunately died of yellow fever in 1808 when his son, Nathaniel Jr., was 4 years old. But you'll find on this channel over and over again, and anytime you run into any kind of New England history, Salem always seems to be involved. So Old Bet was purchased around 1808 by a New York farmer named Hachaliah Bailey, who had the instincts of a born showman. He paid approximately $1,000 for her. He initially thought that she might be a useful beast of burden on his farm. She was not. She was, however, an extraordinary attraction. So he started charging his neighbors 25 cents apiece to come and look at her. And word spread. He ran out of neighbors, so he started taking her on the road. And he followed the post roads of New England from town to town, setting her up in a barn or a tavern stable yard and charging 25 cents a head, and then moving on to the next town before the novelty wore off. Now, the funny thing is that he walked her only at night, specifically so that nobody could see her from the road without paying 25 cents. Old Bet was 5 tons of business model, and Bailey was not giving free samples. She had a talent that advertisements boasted about widely. She could uncork bottles of spirituous liquors with her trunk. The Year Without a Summer was not her first rodeo. In 1816, already making a handsome living from this arrangement, Bailey loaded Old Bet and a caged lion onto a boat and headed for Maine. This was the most northern reaches of his tour. He went to Belfast and then up the Kennebec River to Augusta and Hollowell. And then they parted ways with the Lion. What happened to the Lion? Inquiring minds want to know. And then they walked south through Lewiston and New Gloucester and the towns along the way. In Lewiston, Old Bet came to a bridge over the Androscoggin River. She examined it. She decided she did not trust it, and she walked into the river and swam across instead. An eyewitness named Esther Moody was still telling the tale 75 years later. She said that Old Bet refused to come out of the water for a long time. She loved it. For a brief, shining moment in the coldest summer in memory, an elephant played in the Androscoggin River and enjoyed herself. And then they continued to walk south. Now, before the elephant reaches Alfred, Maine, and her final demise, I want to stop and tell you about Cloe. Now, I know about Cloe because of a letter. Nancy Purley wrote to her sister, Rebecca Purley Fessenden, and those of you following this channel will run into those names over and over again. She was writing to ask her sister if she had heard anything about the elephant coming to Freiburg, where her sister lived, because she wanted to go. That letter sparked a memory in a woman named Cloe Purley. Now, Cloe had come to Salem on a slave ship when she was approximately 7 years old, we think. She was purchased on the dock at Salem along with 3 other enslaved people as dowries for the children of Deacon John Flint. She was property. She was a gift. She was 7 years old and she was in Salem, Massachusetts, and her mother was somewhere on the other side of the ocean. Now, John Flint's wife taught Cloe to read and write and to do household chores. She gave her something, literacy, that nobody could take away. Now, around 1778, when Cloe was approximately 10 years old, she was brought to Bridgeton, Maine with Enoch and Anna Flint Purley. She became a big part of the Purley household. She built a life there out of what she had been taught and what she had carried across the ocean inside her. She could read, she could write, and she remembered. When the news came that an elephant had been seen on the road, Cloe laughed out loud because she remembered. She remembered being with her mother in Africa. She was very young, and she remembered elephants coming through the jungle. The adults at the outside of the group, the babies in the middle of the line, holding trunks to tails. African elephants move in family groups exactly as she described. The adults form a protective perimeter. The young stay in the center, and the calves follow close, sometimes holding the tail of the adult in front of them with their trunks. It's a specific and accurate memory. She had seen this with her own eyes as a small child, with her mother beside her. That memory had crossed the Atlantic in the hold of a slave ship. It had survived everything that was done to her. The purchase on the dock, the unfamiliar house, the strange, cold city, the journey to Bridgeton, the years of building a life in a household where she was property. And also, because of one woman's decision to teach her, she was a person who could read and write and remember and tell. She heard about an elephant on the road in Freiburg or thereabouts, and she laughed. And in that laugh was her mother, and the jungle, and the line of elephants with the babies in the middle, holding trunks to tails. Some things survive everything. But now back to Old Bet. On the night of July 23rd, 1816, Old Bet and Hachaliah Bailey arrived in Alfred, Maine, and put up at a tavern stable. The next morning, July 24th, they set out again on the road south. Daniel Davis was waiting in the bushes alongside what is now Route 4. He stepped out of the bushes. He fired 2 musket balls into Old Bet just behind her shoulder. She died on the road. The newspapers of the time called it an elephant murder. They called Davis a wretch and a miserable vagabond. They dispatched letters to the editors of the Boston papers. The entire region was outraged. Davis was arrested and charged with trespassing, not murder. She was an animal, and the law treated her as property. He spent 3 days in jail. He posted bail of $500, and then he disappeared from the historical record entirely. There was no trial, there was no conviction, he was simply gone. His stated reason, the one he was quoted as giving, was that he didn't think it was right to charge a poor farmer 25 cents to see an elephant when some of those folks needed the money more than Hachaliah Bailey. He was not wrong about the economics. He was not right about the solution. Old Bet was so large she had to be buried where she fell, but she didn't stay buried long. Hachaliah Bailey was many things, but he was not a man who let a revenue stream die with his elephant. He hired local men to help remove Old Bet's hide and bones. He had them taxidermied, and he took them back on tour. Old Bet reconstituted, Old Bet preserved. Old Bet still drawing crowds, still charging 25 cents, with the considerable advantage that she no longer needed to be fed. Her remains were still drawing crowds in New York City 5 years later. Then they vanished from the public record, probably destroyed in one of the many fires that consumed America's early museums, which were themselves highly combustible attractions. Bailey went home to Somers, New York, and built the Elephant Hotel, a grand tavern and inn at the main crossroads of a town with a wooden statue of Old Bet on a tall granite pillar in front. He served 2 terms in the New York State Legislature. He bought a stagecoach line. He prospered, and among the boys he had employed to sell tickets during Old Bet's tours of New England was a young man from Bethel, Connecticut, who had watched carefully and learned what people would pay to see. His name was Phineas Taylor Barnum. P.T. Barnum later called Hachaliah Bailey the father of the American circus. The thread runs from Old Bet's bones to Bailey's hotel to a boy selling tickets to the greatest showman in American history, and it runs through Maine. There is a granite monument on Route 4 in Alfred, Maine. It was erected in 1963, the 147th anniversary of Old Bet's death. The bronze marker reads simply, Site of Slaying of Elephant, July 24th, 1816. Sometimes there are flowers at the site. And in Somers, New York, the Elephant Hotel still stands. The wooden statue of Old Bet wore out over the years, and it was replaced, most recently with a bronze one that was funded by a local family in 2024. She's still there, still on the pillar, still watching the crossroads. Hachaliah Bailey named her Old Bet. Some say after an ex-wife, some say because he was betting everything on her drawing a crowd. And she did draw crowds, and she swam in the Androscoggin River, and she uncorked bottles of whiskey with her trunk, and she walked through the coldest summer in memory on the post roads of New England, always at night, so nobody could see her for free. And then she was murdered on a main road by a desperate man in a desperate summer. And in a farmhouse in Bridgeton, a woman named Cloe heard about an elephant on the road, and she laughed out loud and remembered her mother and the babies in the middle of the line holding trunks to tails. I'll see you again somewhere in time.